Hi guys, my name's Vanessa Smedley and I'm a painter. Today we're going to paint this cute little kitty cat right here, this little calico, simply because I feel like it. And it's got a little bit of fall foliage, or at least fall colors. And 'tis the season, so they say. But anyways, so let's do this. And here are today's materials. You can screenshot it or they're listed in the description for you. I'm going to start out today by mixing a very watery consistency of Payne's Gray. I'm talking mostly water. And that very slight tint of Payne's Gray we are going to use for the sky because it's mostly kind of white. But I'm wetting the entire sky first and then I'm just dropping that in there, which makes it even lighter. Now I'm mixing up a much darker consistency of Payne's Gray, and we're going to use that for this line of trees in the background. Now I let the entire sky dry first. You don't have to let it dry completely if you don't want to. It just depends on how much you want the trees to diffuse into your background. For me, I wanted them to be fairly defined, so I'm adding this in, and then I'm going to come back in with even stronger Payne's Gray and run that along the bottom in different areas for kind of shadows on the sides of the trees. Now I'm mixing up a medium value of Payne's Gray, somewhere halfway in between the two of those. And then we're going to mix up some lemon yellow, ultramarine blue, and just a little bit of alizarin crimson to kind of like gray that down a little bit. And then we're going to use the same exact mixture, but add more of the blue in to make it darker. We're going to work on the mid-ground here, so I'm wetting the entire area, being very sure to paint around the cat because she's mostly white. We don't want to cover up her nice white yet. So I'm adding in that medium Payne's Gray there, adding in some splotches of a little bit darker. I'm going to get all these little areas over here as well so that I don't have to try to match that color later. That won't be very much fun. I did them in sections because I didn't want the first area to dry out while I was painting the new area. So we've got that going. Now that that paint has had a little bit of time to soak in, I'm adding in some of this lighter green, and I'm basically kind of mimicking grassy patterns here in the background because it's going to be blurry, but it's also going to be able to be defined just a little bit. You're going to be able to tell what it is. And now I'm coming in with the darker of the greens and adding in some more of the grassy patterns here, and we're just going to let that spread. Next, I'm taking a palette knife and I'm scraping some of that paint back out of the way. That's going to add in some more texture and some highlight areas. And then I've added in a little bit of cadmium yellow in the background for some blurry flowers as well. While the background is drying, I'm mixing up some Payne's Gray, some burnt umber, and then I'm adding in some sap green. And this is going to be for that kind of mossy concrete texture of the wall that she's standing on, so it's kind of an odd color. I've watered that color down significantly, and I'm taking a flat brush and I'm just making a nice flat wash here, and then I'm going to come back in and add darker consistencies of that same color. I'm going to add just plain burnt umber in some areas, plain Payne's Gray in certain areas, make sure I get that shadow underneath the cat, and kind of just make a splotchy mess of this because it is, after all, mossy concrete. And then to get some lighter splotches in all of this moss, I'm going to add in some just plain regular old table salt and then let that dry. Next, I'm going to mix up a color for this terracotta or copper thing that she's laying on. So I've got burnt sienna and I'm adding a little bit of sap green into that to kind of give it a greenish tone to it, and we'll just use that. I'm using my flat brush again to just lay in that nice flat wash. I'm just going to lay in that color, and then I'm going to lift some of it out with a nice damp brush, and then I'm going to lay in just some regular old burnt umber around the edges for like a shadow color for this. And we're kind of making it splotchy because it is splotchy in the photo. I've allowed all of that to dry, and now I'm coming back in to add the shadow underneath the cat on the wall. And then the whole front of the wall is in shadow, so I'm using a nice flat brush to add a darker consistency of that color to just show the shadow area on it. And now that we have a nice flat wash on it, we are adding back in some Payne's Gray, Burnt Umber, all of the colors that we used, kind of splotchy, just to add more of that random texture from the moss. Now we're using some Payne's Gray to come back in and add some more defined areas in all of this grass. We've got the blurry bits in the back, and we've got some more defined areas in the front, closest to the viewer. It's time for fun facts about calico cats, and the first off, calico cats are not a breed. It's literally just talking about that unique pattern with the orange, black, and white. The next fact is that almost all calico cats are female, because only about 1 in every 3,000 calico cats are male. That's because their coloring is linked to having 2 X chromosomes. Thought I would just dry brush a little bit of Payne's Gray into the background here. It looked just a little bit flat. Next, I mix yellow ochre together with French ultramarine blue, and we're going to use that for the shadow on the white parts of the cat. And I am watering that down very, very, very much. We're just using this as basically a tint of a color, but we do want it to be enough of a difference to where you can see the very, very light white parts as well. So I'm just adding that in here now, and I'm painting around the very whitest parts because we want to leave that as highlights. It's starting to dry out a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a spray with a spray bottle, and then I'm going to come back in with a mixture that has a little bit more ultramarine blue in it, and that's a little darker. And we're going to use that for the darkest parts of the shadows here. Next, I'm adding in some cadmium yellow into a few areas, and that is reflection, I think, from the yellow flowers above that we're going to add later. Next, I grab a nice thick consistency of cadmium yellow and another of lemon yellow, and we're going to use this to begin to add in the foliage that's above the cat. Next, I begin to use that nice bright lemon yellow, and I'm going to go ahead and dry brush in all of this foliage up here. We're going to start out with lemon yellow, and then we're going to add some other colors, but I'm kind of following the pattern of the way that I know the branches are going to go. And then I'm adding in some of the cadmium yellow for darker areas of this. While that is still wet, I am mixing up some burnt umber with some Payne's Gray. I'm going to use that for the branches. As I'm painting in the branches, I'm skipping parts of the yellow so that you can see the foliage overlapping the branches. And then as I'm adding this in here, it is still a little bit wet, so that brown is kind of mixing in with the yellow, but that's totally fine because we're going to be adding in shadow in those areas, and it kind of just looks like it's shadowed. And that to me is a lot more naturalistic of a way to add in these branches rather than either laying down the branches first and then letting them dry and trying to put yellow on the top of it. That would never work because yellow is too transparent. Or dry brushing it all the yellow in first and letting that dry and putting in the branches over the top. I don't think that's as effective either. I think it's best to just add it in as it's still wet but not super wet. And that way it has a little bit more natural of a melding together with the foliage. Now we're going to come back in and work on the planter, and I'm just using my same color mixes of the burnt sienna and sap green and also the burnt umber, and we're just adding in some more details and darker shadows. For the orange parts on this Calico Cat, I am just using burnt sienna, just very watery, and we're just going to add that all over all of the colored areas. I'm just going to go ahead and put it underneath that black as well, just for now. I I've mixed a tiny little bit of Carbazole Violet into yellow ochre, and I'm going to use that to come back in for the shadows on all these yellow foliage areas. I just added a tiny little bit of it to cool that yellow ochre down because it was just a little too reddish to be like a shadow color here. So and I'm adding a suggestion of fur in here with some darker burnt sienna. Just adding a little bit of water to smooth that in on the edges as well. Some of this shadow needs to be darkened, so I've added in a little bit more ultramarine to my shadow mix, and I'm adding that in the areas that are the darkest shadows on the white. Now I'm mixing up a really nice black by using French ultramarine and burnt sienna straight out of the tube and as strong as you can get it. I mix that together and it's the perfect black. I've added a little bit of water into that black mixture, and now I'm just going to come back in and add all of the black areas on this nice Calico Cat. Another random fact about Calico Cats is that ancient Japanese sailors used to think that these cats were lucky, so they would bring them along on their journeys to ward off storms and things like that. And adding a tiny little bit of very watery Alizarin Crimson to the nose and inside the ears. And I'm just using that black mixture for some very tiny last minute details like the nostrils and the little whisker areas that the whiskers come out of and stuff like that. And then I go on to darken some of the shadow areas of the white because I'm noticing there's not enough contrast on the white, like backlit areas of the cat, to the shadow parts. You want to really make that kind of dramatic sunlight effect come in here. And in order to do that, you have to make the shadows dark enough in order to make the white stand out more. I'm just using some Payne's Gray to darken some of the shadows underneath the tub, underneath the feet, all of that kind of stuff. That's really what's going to make this pop and make it look 3D, is the darkest shadows. Next, I'm bringing in a 7mm white Posca Pen to add the lightest areas of the highlights. We're going to do that on top of the pot here, and then we're going to use it for the whiskers and some of the edges of the white, the backlit part, all of that kind of stuff. And here's the finished painting, all dried and with the tape removed and all that kind of stuff. And I do think that that sense of light, that backlit sense of light, does come through on this. So I'm pretty happy with it. And there you have it, a nice little kitty cat lounging around on a brisk fall day, one would assume. Unless it's in the south, and then you never know. But anyways, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all of that stuff, because that's how this channel gets to grow. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again in 2 weeks.